Hi, I'm Missy.
And I'm Meg.
And we are the hosts of Grimly Podcast.
Each week, we dive into a story that has some seriously creepy subjects,
Like aliens,
cryptids,
ghost stories,
true crime,
and unsolved mysteries and disappearances.
Tune in every Monday for a new creepy story.
Listen wherever you get your podcasts, and remember,
Stay grimly curious.
Do you know who you are? And how can you be sure? People will go through extraordinary feats of self-discovery. Some compare birth records. Others revisit childhood stories or swap for DNA. But what happens when you come up empty? When the search isn't for answers, but for a question we can't quite form.
Welcome to Down the Crooked Path. I'm your host, Amanda Joy. Join me as we dive into eerie and spine-chilling stories that blur the lines between reality and the unknown. From cryptids and mysterious disappearances to true crime, UFO sightings, and paranormal activity. Venture into the unknown and uncover the secrets that lie down the crooked path.
In 1828, a teenage boy stumbled onto the streets of Nuremberg like a puzzle piece with no matching edge. He had no name, he had no memory, just a note in his pocket with a story too fragmented to trust. His name, Kaspar Hauser, was given, not remembered. He became the fascination of a society hungry to define him. Was he a lost heir, scientific marvel, deceptive imposter? Maybe all of the above. But beneath the noise was a quiet truth. He might have been the only one not pretending. Today's journey dives into a life without a past, and the strange obsession that followed. Was he a victim, a symbol, or something else entirely? This is the story of Kaspar Hauser, and the unsettling questions he leaves behind. Who are we? Especially when everything we know about ourselves might be wrong. On a quiet Monday afternoon, May 26, 1828, the city of Nuremberg, Germany, became the stage for an event that would ignite whispers and speculation across Europe. A teenage boy, roughly 16 years old, emerged at the gates of the city. He seemed dazed, exhausted from walking, his gait awkward and unsteady. His clothing was simple yet peculiar, worn and coarse, almost peasant-like, but unfamiliar in its style, as if he had been dressed by someone with little sense of the outside world. The boy seemed completely unfamiliar with the world to which he had just arrived. He did not recognize everyday objects, showed no understanding of money, and had no grasp of reading or writing. He reacted to the clatter of carts and the bustling crowds with kind of startling confusion, flinching at unfamiliar sounds and staring wide-eyed at ordinary sights as if they were an impossible novel. His mannerisms suggested that he had spent much of his life in isolation, shielded from language, interaction, and even sunlight. The townspeople immediately recognized that the boy needed help. When questioned by authorities, he offered little more than two phrases: "I want to be a cavalryman like my father," and "horse, horse," spoken with stiff repetition, like something memorized long before he understood what it meant. He didn't seem to know his own name, nor could he explain where he came from. His identity remained locked behind vacant stares and fragmented speech. Clutched tightly in his hands were two small folded papers, yellowed and smudged from being handled, possibly for days. The first was addressed to the captain of the 4th Cavalry Regiment and was written in almost childlike script. It claimed that the boy had been taken as an infant and raised in complete isolation, never allowed to leave the confines of his caretaker's home. It stated that he was now being released into society, expected to follow in the footsteps of his deceased father by serving in the military. The wording was formal, yet strangely off-kilter, as if mimicking official correspondence without fully understanding its tone. The second letter alleged to be from his mother, but bore no date and only offered vague references to family ties and a brief mention of having given birth in 1812. The descriptions were either oddly sentimental or curiously vacant, altering between sweet family life and a tone of emotional distance. Strikingly, both letters seem to have been written by the same hand, despite supposedly coming from two different people. The penmanship featured identical quirks, uneven pressure, sharp angles in the looped letters, and a signature rhythm in the way certain words were misspelled. Officials who examined the documents noted their inconsistencies, the lack of specific place names, the absence of dates, the strange, almost rehearsed details that seemed designed to invoke pity without supplying verifiable truth. And more troubling, neither letter explained how the boy had traveled to Nuremberg or why he had arrived alone. It was as if the paper trail had been crafted to introduce him to the world without truly revealing anything, just enough to grant him a name and purpose, but not enough to account for the life that he had already lived, or the silence in his eyes that suggested much of it had been spent in darkness. Though the boy could not speak his own name, one detail appeared consistently in both letters: Kaspar Hauser. And so the boy became known as Kaspar Hauser. He did not choose the name, nor did he recognize it, but it was the one written in the letters he carried. It became his identity by default, absorbed into official records and echoed through police reports, witness statements, and eventually newspaper headlines. The name gave the public something to hold on to, even if the boy himself remained a stranger to it. With no family to step forward, no language that could place him, and no search efforts that matched his appearance, Kaspar's origins remained unresolved. Yet his name began to move quickly, picked up by scholars, whispered in parlors, and examined in drawing rooms far beyond Nuremberg's borders. People speculated endlessly about what he might reveal if he could only speak clearly, if he could only remember something. After his bewildering arrival in Nuremberg, Kaspar Hauser was placed under temporary custody in the city's prison tower. Authorities, unsure of what to make of him, assigned Andres Hittel, the tower jailer, to oversee his care. Hittel was not a physician or a scholar, but he approached the boy with quiet patience. In those first days, Kaspar cried often, refusing food beyond bread and water, and seemed overwhelmed by even the simplest interactions. He sat motionless for hours, avoiding eye contact, startled by candlelight and the ticking of clocks. But something shifted when Hittel's children began to visit. His 11-year-old son in particular took a gentle interest in Kaspar, teaching him letters and encouraging him to speak. One of the first gifts given to Kaspar during this time was a small wooden toy horse. He clung to it with unusual intensity, cradling it as if it were familiar. He called it horse repeatedly. The toy seemed to comfort him, and it quickly became one of his most prized possessions. Moved by his progress, authorities allowed Kaspar to live on the lower floor of the tower alongside the Hittel family. It was the first time he had shared space with others, and the first time he was treated not as a curiosity, but as a person. In that quiet domestic setting, surrounded by children, letters, and the wooden horse he never let go, Kaspar began to emerge from the silence that had defined his life. As the weeks passed and Kaspar's condition improved, city officials recognized that his development required more than kindness and routine. The quiet nurturing of the Hittel family had coaxed him from near silence into tentative communication, but it was clear that his progress was only just beginning. The boy's mind was quick to absorb, and behind his soft-spoken demeanor, there was a strange depth that defied easy explanation. In response, the city arranged for Kaspar to be placed in the home of George Frederick Daumer, a local schoolmaster with an interest in philosophy. Daumer offered a different kind of sanctuary, one built not on comfort but on inquiry. His household was modest but structured, filled with books, instruments, and ideas. Kaspar entered it not as a patient, but as a student. Where Hatel's children taught Kaspar to speak, Dahmer gave him language. Through methodical lessons, he learned to read, to write, and to express thoughts with increasing clarity. His sketching grew more elaborate, and his curiosity expanded beyond toys and letters. He began asking questions, some naive, some with startling abstract, about nature, morality, and human behavior. Dahmer was fascinated. He recorded Kaspar's progress with precision, noting moments of insight, confusion, and emotional volatility. Although initially awkward and timid, Kaspar took to instruction with surprising speed. Within weeks, he demonstrated an aptitude for reading and writing, absorbing language as if it had always been just beyond reach. He began composing simple sentences and answering questions with growing confidence. Often scribbling down thoughts he struggled to articulate out loud. Drawing, too, became a favorite outlet. He filled pages with detailed sketches, often depicting architectural structures, fascinating landscapes, and intricate designs that astonished those who saw them. Many observers remarked on the strange blend of innocence and precision in his artwork, as though his mind was channeling visions from a place untouched by conventional experience. This period marked a transformation. Kaspar, once mute and aimless, was now a student, engaged, observant, and curiously gifted. His progress only deepened the mystery, raising new questions about where such talents had come from and how much he had truly understood about his circumstances before arriving in Nuremberg. Yet, beneath the excitement, there lingered a quiet truth. The more Kaspar learned to speak and write, the more haunting his story became. As Kaspar began to develop language, he slowly revealed fragments of the life he claimed to have lived before appearing. He spoke of a confined existence inside a dark, narrow cell, scarcely larger than a closet. There were no windows. The floor was hard and cold. He did not recall seeing sun or the feeling of fresh air. For as long as he could remember, the boy had been kept there in total darkness, never spoken to, never allowed to leave, and his only source of sustenance had been bread and water, which appeared beside his straw bedding each morning, left silently. He claimed that sometimes the water had a weird taste to it and a tinge to the color. He would fall asleep, and when he would awaken, he often found that his nails had been trimmed, his hair cut, and he had been bathed, although he had no memory of how or when this had been done. There were long stretches of sleep punctuated by brief awakenings. He had little concept of time, was essentially cocooned by silence, never knowing whether it was day or night. Eventually, a man began to visit Kaspar. He recalled the figure wearing a mask and keeping his face hidden. Oftentimes, when he would enter Kaspar's cell, he would force him to turn his back to the man and face the wall. The man never offered his name. He did, however, begin to teach Kaspar to walk and write, placing a wooden horse in the boy's lap and showing him how to form letters, drilling him in repetition. Kaspar remembered being taught how to hold a pen, to copy phrases, and even to recite the peculiar sentences he would later repeat. I want to be a cavalryman like my father, and horse, horse. After some time, the masked man led Kaspar from his cell, blindfolded him, and guided him through an unfamiliar landscape. Kaspar described feeling the pavement beneath his feet for the first time. The man left him alone in the streets, with those 2 letters tucked in his hand and the rehearsed phrases in his mouth. This was the only script he had ever known. The public's reaction to Kaspar's emergence was immediate and intense, equal parts fascination, empathy, and suspicion. In Nuremberg and beyond, people flocked to catch a glimpse of the strange young man who had arrived without a past. Crowds gathered outside the homes where he was being kept, bringing gifts, others simply hoping for a sight of his pale face and uncertain eyes. The newspapers picked up the story quickly, printing dramatic accounts that blurred fact and speculation. His name, previously unknown to the world, became the centerpiece of a sensational narrative. Many saw Kaspar as a symbol of innocence and suffering. His apparent vulnerability stirred deep emotions in readers and visitors alike, some whom described him as a child of nature, untouched by the corrupting influence of society. Romantic thinkers and philosophers were drawn to him, seeing in his story a metaphor for purity, for the unshaped self, and for the mystery of human origin. Artists sketched him, writers debated him. Scientists and spiritualists alike tend to claim that he was proof of their theories. Yet skepticism lurked behind the awe. His Swiss mastery of reading and writing challenged the notion of total isolation. Doubters began to probe inconsistencies in his testimony, and some questioned the authenticity of the two letters, many believing that Kaspar himself had written them. Whispers circulated that he had been coached, that his story was an elaborate fabrication, possibly orchestrated for a political or psychological intrigue. The masked figure, the vague accounts of captivity, and the haunting repetition of the two sentences all lent themselves to a theory that veered from tragedy into manipulation. Soon after his placement in the care of George Friedrich Dahmer, Kaspar began to learn to ride real horses. Despite having never seen one up close, he showed a natural ease in the saddle. His posture, developed from years of sitting in confinement, appeared to suit horseback riding unusually well. The quick progress raised eyebrows and fueled speculations. Some took it as evidence of noble heritage, perhaps a remnant of training from before his isolation, and others saw it as coincidence or simply a sign of untapped physical intuition. As Kaspar Hauser's story spread beyond Nuremberg, so did speculation of who he might truly be. Among the theories whispered across drawing rooms and circulated in letters between court circles, one possibility gained remarkable traction: that he was the hereditary prince of Baden, stolen away in infancy to make room for another heir. The official narrative claimed that the prince, born in 1812 to the Grand Duke Karl of Baden and his wife Stephanie, had died shortly after birth. But some believed this death had been fabricated, an elaborate deception orchestrated by power-seeking relatives who feared the child's place in succession. According to these suspicions, the newborn prince had been secretly removed and hidden away, his life erased and replaced by false burial. It was a quiet rumor for years, kept alive by murmurs and private grievances, but when Kaspar appeared, nameless and disoriented, and the exact age that the prince would have been, the theory resurfaced with renewed urgency. Kaspar's behavior only added fuel to the idea. His noble bearing, his delicate features, and especially his fascination with cavalry all seemed uncannily to align with the aristocratic grooming. The phrase he had been taught to repeat, "I want to be a cavalryman like my father," took on new meaning when imagined through the lens of royal upbringing. Supporters of this theory pointed to his equestrian abilities, which developed quickly under Dahmer's care, and revealed an instinctive comfort when horseback riding. To many, this skill suggested hidden memory, the kind that lingered even after identity had been stripped away. The theory traveled quickly through European courts and salons. Philosophers debated its plausibility, aristocrats quietly investigated family connections, and members of the public, drawn to the romantic tragedy of a lost prince reclaimed from darkness, embraced it with a sense of urgency. No one could verify it, but no one could really dismiss it either. On the afternoon of October 17, 1829, the quiet rhythm of Kaspar Hauser's life was shattered. He was discovered in the cellar of the house, bleeding from a gash above his right eyebrow. The wound was fresh, the blood traveling through the room in an erratic pattern, suggesting panic and confusion. He had fled from the garden, stumbling through the house and descending into the cellar, where he was found trembling and incoherent. According to Kaspar's account, he had gone to use the outdoor privy when he was suddenly struck on the forehead by a man dressed in dark clothing. The assailant wore a black silk cloak and a black scarf that concealed most of his face. Kaspar described the man as tall and silent, delivering a single and chilling sentence before vanishing. "You still have to die before you leave the city of Nuremberg." The blow was forceful and left a deep gash above Kaspar's right eyebrow. Disoriented and bleeding, he fled from the privy into the house, staggering through the rooms in a panic. Blood marked his path, first up the stairs to the first floor, then down again, where he crawled through a trapdoor into the cellar. It was there that he was found, trembling. His emotional state was raw and unguarded. He clutched his head and repeated phrases in broken German. "Man, hit me. Man, hit me. Why you kill me? What I do to you? Me want live." Witnesses described him as pale, shaking, barely able to speak. He insisted that the voice of the attacker was familiar, the same voice he had heard during his years of confinement, the man who taught him to walk and speak, and who had ultimately led him to Nuremberg. Authorities were alarmed. Physicians treated the wound, which was serious but not life-threatening. Investigators searched the premises and found a razor tucked away in Kaspar's room, raising immediate doubts. Some authorities began to suspect that the injury was self-inflicted, possibly staged to regain sympathy or deflect criticism. Kaspar had recently quarreled with Dahmer, who had accused him of dishonesty. The timing, the location, the presence of the weapon all cast shadow over his account. But Kaspar's emotional collapse was undeniable. He wept openly, refused food, and recoiled from questions. His behavior in the days that followed was erratic, altering between silence and outbursts of agitation. Whether the attack was real or imagined, it had left a mark deeper than the wound itself. The boy who had once emerged from isolation now seemed to retreat again, not into a cell, but into fear. After this traumatic incident, Kaspar Hauser was moved into the household of Johann Bieberbach. The decision was made by city authorities who believed Kaspar needed a more secure and structured environment, away from the tensions that had begun to surface in his previous residence. At first, the arrangement seemed promising. The Bieberbach family welcomed Kaspar with cautious optimism, and he responded with polite enthusiasm. He continued his studies, maintained an interest in drawing, and tried to adapt to the rhythms of domestic life. But beneath the surface, tensions began. Kaspar's behavior grew erratic. He was prone to mood swings, exaggerated stories, and sudden emotional outbursts. He often made claims that couldn't be verified and seemed to thrive on the attention his mystery attracted. Bieberbach, in particular, grew increasingly frustrated. She described Kaspar as vain and manipulative, accusing him of dishonesty and theatrical self-pity. She referred to his horrendous mendacity and his art of dissimulation, noting that he often played the victim when challenged. The family's patience wore thin, and what had begun as a gesture of civic compassion slowly turned into strained coexistence. On the morning of April 3rd, 1830, a sharp crack echoed through the Bieberbach home. A pistol had been discharged inside of Kaspar Hauser's room. Members of the household rushed in and found him laying on the floor, bleeding from a wound to the side of his head. He was conscious but dazed, and the sight of blood once again stirred alarm and confusion. Kaspar's explanation came slowly. He said he had climbed onto a chair to reach for some books on a high shelf. As the chair tipped, he lost his balance and instinctively grabbed at the wall. His hand, he claimed, landed on the pistol that had been hanging there. The weapon fired as he fell, grazing his head. The wound was shallow, more of a scrape than a puncture, but it was enough to draw blood and concern. The story, however, raised immediate doubts. The pistol had been mounted high and out of reach, not in a place where one would naturally grab for support. The angle of the wound didn't quite match the account. The injury itself seemed too superficial for close-range gunshot. Tensions in the household had already been rising. Kaspar had recently been reprimanded for dishonesty, and Mrs. Bieberbach had grown openly critical, describing him as vain, theatrical, and prone to invention. Some suspected that the incident was staged, another attempt to regain sympathy or deflect scrutiny. Others believed it was a genuine accident, the result of a clumsy moment in a strained environment. But regardless of the intent, the pistol shot deepened the divide between Kaspar and those around him. The boy who had once inspired awe and compassion was now viewed with growing suspicion. In May of 1830, following the pistol incident and the growing strain within the Bieberbach household, Kaspar was transferred into the care of Baron von Trecher, a prominent figure in the Nuremberg civic life. The move was intended to provide Kaspar with a more dignified and stable environment, one that might temper the emotional volatility and restore public confidence in his guardianship. Baron von Trecher was known for his measured temperament and civic responsibility. He approached Kaspar's case with cautious interest, aware of both the boy's troubled history and the swirling rumors of royal descent. His household was quieter than the previous ones, more formal and less emotionally entangled. Kaspar was given space to continue his studies and maintain his routines, but the atmosphere was more reserved. The Baron kept detailed notes on Kaspar's behavior, and while he offered support, he did not indulge in the boy's dramatic tendencies. Over time, von Trecher grew increasingly skeptical. He noted Kaspar's vanity, his tendency to exaggerate, and his frequent contradictions. Like others before him, the Baron began to question the authenticity of Kaspar's stories. He described him as full of vanity and lies, echoing the frustrations voiced by the Bieberbach home. Yet despite these doubts, von Trecher did not abandon Kaspar. He remained his legal guardian and continued to advocate for his protection, even as the boy's reputation began to fracture. This period marked a subtle shift in Kaspar's public image. No longer the wide-eyed innocent, he was now seen by many as a complicated figure, part victim, part instigator. The Baron's household offered structure, but it could not resolve the deeper questions that clung to Kaspar's identity. Lord Philip Henry Stanhope arrived in Nuremberg in 1831, drawn by the growing mystery surrounding Kaspar Hauser. By then, Kaspar had become a figure of fascination across Europe. His strange origins, rapid development, and the persistent theory that he might be of noble birth had captured imaginations far beyond Bavaria. Stanhope, an English aristocrat with a deep connection to German courts and a long-standing interest in continental affairs, was intrigued. Their first meeting was warm. Stanhope treated Kaspar with generosity and affection, gifting him fine clothing tailored in Parisian styles, a music box, art supplies, prayer book, and a generous allowance. He listened attentively to Kaspar's story and pledged to uncover the truth of his origins. For Kaspar, who had long felt adrift and misunderstood, Stanhope's arrival felt like a turning point, perhaps even a rescue. Stanhope didn't stop at gifts. He funded a costly investigation in Hungary based on Kaspar's vague recollections of Slavic and Magyar words, hoping to trace any link to the noble lineage. He also began corresponding with officials and scholars involved in Kaspar's case, including Amsel von Fieberbach, who had long championed the theory of Kaspar's princely descent. During this period, Stanhope's letters to Kaspar were affectionate and encouraging. He referred to him as mein lieber Freund and spoke of future plans, including the possibility of bringing Kaspar to England. The boy clung to these promises, seeing in Stanhope not just a benefactor, but a father figure, someone who might finally lift the veil from his past. But beneath the warmth, Stanhope was also observing. He kept detailed notes, asking probing questions, and quietly weighed the inconsistencies in Kaspar's stories. For now, though, he remained close, and his presence added a new layer of legitimacy to the search for Kaspar's identity. In January of 1832, Kaspar Hauser's life shifted once again. Following Lord Stanhope's growing involvement and the fading promise of a journey to England, Kaspar was quietly relocated to the town of Asbach, where he was placed under the care of Johann Georg Meyer, a strict and methodical schoolmaster. The transition was marked not by ceremony or warmth. Meyer was known for his rigid discipline and reserved temperament, qualities that stood in stark contrast to the more nurturing environments Kaspar had previously known. The arrangements had been made under Stanhope's approval, and while the English nobleman continued to fund Kaspar's upkeep, his presence had grown distant. The letters arrived, but the tone had cooled. The affectionate promises of earlier months were replaced by formalities and silence. Kaspar entered Meyer's household with cautious optimism. He was given modest accommodations and a structured routine. Meyer expected punctuality, obedience, and academic diligence. But Kaspar, now nearly 20, struggled under the weight of these expectations. His behavior became erratic. He missed appointments, fabricated stories, and often clashed with Meyer's stern demeanor. The schoolmaster was unimpressed by Kaspar's emotional volatility and his perceived vanity, and began to document his frustrations. He saw in the young boy not a mystery to be solved, but a burden to be managed. Despite the tension, Kaspar remained in Ansbach. He found occasional work as a copyist in the lawyer's office and continued to have faith that Stanhope would return and fulfill his promise. But the days passed quietly, and the silence from England grew heavier. Kaspar spoke less of Stanhope now, though he kept the gifts the English nobleman had given him. The boy who had once captivated thousands now lived in a small town, under watchful eyes, with fewer allies and a story that had begun to lose its shine. Then, in early December, a new tension crept into the household. Kaspar and Meyer quarreled, sharp words exchanged, accusations made. Meyer, frustrated, confided to others that he no longer knew how to manage the young man. Kaspar, for his part, seemed wounded, confused, and increasingly desperate. On the cold afternoon of December 14, 1833, Kaspar Hauser left his modest lodgings in Ansbach and walked towards the Court Garden, a quiet public park not far from the center of town. The sky was overcast, the air damp with winter. He told no one where he was going. Later that day, he staggered back to the house, clutching his chest. His coat was stained with blood, and he collapsed in the hallway, gasping for breath, and he managed to utter a few broken phrases. Went court garden, man, had knife, gave beg, struck. I ran as I could. Beg must lie there. His voice was strained and his breathing shallow. A wound had pierced his left breast, narrow and deep, consistent with a stab from a sharp double-edged blade. The authorities were summoned immediately. Kaspar was barely coherent, but he insisted that he had been lured to the garden by a stranger who claimed to have information about his origins. The man, he said, handed him a small bag or purse, then suddenly stabbed him and fled. Kaspar said that he had run as best as he could, staggered through the park and back to Meyer's house. A search of the court garden turned up the bag he described. Inside was a folded note, written in mirror script, a style Kaspar was known to use. The message, translated from German, read, "Hauser will be able to tell you quite precisely how I look and from where I am. To save Hauser the effort, I want to tell you myself from where I come. I come from the Bavarian border, on the river. I will even tell you the name, M.L.O." The note was riddled with spelling and grammatical errors, many of which matched Kaspar's own writing habits. The triangular fold of the paper was also the style he frequently used. No weapon was found, no footprints in the snow beyond Kaspar's own, no witnesses. Kaspar's condition worsened over the next 2 days. He drifted in and out of consciousness, muttering incoherently about writing with pencil and repeating fragments of the attack. Physicians tried to treat the wound, but it had punctured too deeply. On December 17th, Kaspar Hauser died. His final words were said to be, "I'm tired. I want to die." The town mourned, but the questions multiplied. Had Kaspar been murdered to silence a royal secret? Had he staged the attack himself, only to misjudge the depth of the wound? Was the note a clue or a fabrication? He was buried in Ansbach, and his epitaph reads, "Here lies Kaspar Hauser, enigma of his time, mysterious his death." The death of Kaspar Hauser sent ripples through Ansbach and far beyond. For a boy once crowned in whispers as a lost prince, his final days unfolded not in grandeur, but in pain, alone, bleeding, and afraid. The townspeople, long divided in their opinion of him, reacted with stunned silence. In the days after the fatal stabbing, speculations reignited like dried tinder. Some mourned genuinely, recalling the pale stranger who had arrived years earlier with a letter in his hand and no past to speak of. Others eyed the strange note found in the court garden and whispered of conspiracy. Some said that someone had returned to finish what had begun in the shadows of Nuremberg. Yet beneath the mourning, suspicions turned sharply towards two men. And Meyer, Kaspar's guardian in Ansbach, became a lightning rod for criticism. Known for his strict manner and emotional distance, Meyer had long struggled with Kaspar's temperament. The relationship was strained, marked by arguments and tension, particularly in those final weeks. It was whispered that Meyer had shown little urgency after the stabbing, questioning the injury's legitimacy even as Kaspar's life slipped away. In the minds of many, Meyer wasn't merely inattentive. He had become a symbol of all the ways the boy had been veiled. And then there was Lord Stanhope. Once Kaspar's most devoted patron, Stanhope had filled the young man's life with gifts, promises, and hope. He had pledged to take Kaspar to England, spoken warmly of friendship, and even funded investigations into the boy's murky past. But as the years passed, his tone cooled, the letters grew sparse, and the promised journey never came. And when Kaspar lay dying in Ansbach, Stanhope was nowhere to be seen. For those who believed in Kaspar, Stanhope's absence felt like a betrayal. Whispers spread that the English lord had played a role far more calculated than protective, that he had come not to solve a mystery, but to contain it. Stanhope would later publish accounts defending his actions, explaining his growing doubts and citing inconsistencies in Kaspar's stories. But the public's opinion had already turned. In the eyes of many, the man who once called Kaspar mon Liebenfreund had abandoned him when it mattered most. The death of Kaspar Hauser didn't bring any closure. It reopened every question his life had ever posed. As the town of Ansbach laid him to rest beneath a gravestone that read, "Riddle of his time," investigators, skeptics, and believers alike began to sift through the fragments he left behind. In the days following his death, local authorities launched an inquiry into the stabbing, but the evidence was thin. The note found in the court garden, written in mirror script and riddled with grammatical errors, was immediately suspect. Its phrasing and folding style matched Kaspar's own habits, and many believed he had written it himself. No weapon was recovered, no footprints were found in the snow beyond Kaspar's own, and the wound, though fatal, was narrow and precise, leading some to suspect it had been self-inflicted, perhaps in a desperate bid for attention that went too far. The investigation stalled, no arrests were made, no leads emerged, and as the silence deepened, the mystery grew louder. In the years that followed, the case drew attention of scholars, writers, and forensic experts. Some, like Paul Johann Asbjørn von Fieberbach, had championed Kaspar's story during his lifetime. But even Fieberbach, before his death in 1833, had begun to express doubts. In a private note he had reportedly written, Kaspar Hauser is a smart, scheming codger, a rogue, a good-for-nothing that ought to be killed. Whether this was genuine disillusionment or frustration remains debated. For all the speculation surrounding Kaspar Hauser's identity, it wasn't until the modern era that a new kind of investigator entered the scene: science. In 1996, researchers in Munich took aim at the enduring mystery by analyzing blood-stained fabric said to belong to Kaspar. The mitochondrial DNA extracted from the sample was compared to the living maternal descendants of Stephanie de Beauharnais, the Grand Duchess of Baden. The match wasn't there, but the test soon came under fire. The authenticity of the fabric was questionable. Museum records hinted that it may have been refreshed over time, potentially contaminating the blood and rendering the results unreliable. Then came the 2002 study, which changed the tide. Scientists examined hair samples believed to belong to Kaspar, and the mitochondrial DNA they uncovered did align with the Baden maternal line. Suddenly, the possibility that Kaspar had royal blood was alive again, but critics pointed out that no definitive chain of custody for the hair had been established, so was it truly his? This back and forth continued for years, a scientific tug-of-war that left no clear answer. It wasn't until 2024 that the question was approached with rigor it deserved. Using advanced sequencing technology capable of analyzing highly degraded material, a team led by renowned geneticist Professor Ture King examined strands of hair conclusively tied to Kaspar. The results were precise. The mitochondrial DNA belonging to haplogroup W, a common type in Western Eurasia, was not present in the Baden family, which carries haplo H. To confirm these findings, the samples were sent to an independent lab in Potsdam, which returned the exact same results, blind to the subject's identity. Not only did the hair and blood samples match each other, but they did not match the lineage. The case was effectively closed, at least in the eyes of science. But for many, the truth still felt elusive. DNA could rule out royalty, but it could not trace Kaspar's path through silence, captivity, or strange circumstances. The blood may speak, but the enigma remains. And so the story of Kaspar Hauser ends where it began, in mystery. Boy without a past, thrust into a world that tried to name him, claim him, or explain him. Over time, he became more than a person. He became a mirror. In him, people saw whatever they were searching for: nobility, injustice, innocence, deceit. And in the silence that surrounded his origins, each voice filled in the blanks with its own truth. But if there's anything his story leaves us with, it's the reminder that not all riddles need solving. Sometimes the power of a life lies not in the answers it offers, but in the questions it refuses to let go of. We all carry something of Kaspar in us, a hunger to be known, to belong, to understand the shape of our own story. And maybe that's why his legacy persists. Because beneath the mystery, beneath the theories, there was a young man who simply wanted to live. So as you step away from this episode, take with you these thoughts. Let the questions inspire, not overwhelm. Honor the truths that cannot be proven, and allow curiosity itself to guide your steps. I'm Amanda Joy. Thank you for listening.